I'll have you introduce yourself in a minute, but we're here because I want to start having conversations with medical professionals, healthcare professionals, and really anyone who's interested in the health and wellness space, and give people a chance to hear some questions and answers that they normally wouldn't get from like a person like you yourself. So that, thank you, Dr. Pedro Teixeira. What is your background and what are you doing now?
Sure. So, I'm a MD, PhD, basically like a very big AI ML nerd that happened to land in healthcare. I grew up in Rhode Island, which is a fun little quirky state, and did biochem and comp sci for my undergrad over at Harvard. Went to Vanderbilt, which has a great biomedical informatics department where I got to do all of my training, which was a great opportunity.
Sure.
And then got to the point where I could go practice, and I just was really excited about the opportunity of bringing AI and tech into healthcare to actually try to make providers' lives easier. And so been working on that now for a fair number of years. We do analytics and pull in from the notes that everybody writes, useful information that help organizations be more efficient and also hopefully provide better care for their patients. And that's the crazy arc that I've gone on, a little bit different, a little more tech heavy than other settings, but I really love medicine. I do miss seeing patients.
Yeah, so I mean, you're helping to solve a really big problem with burnout with healthcare providers. Is the documentation piece. It's a really important piece, but it is why we are at work longer and maybe wake up and do documentation at home or don't see our families as much as we'd like to. So when did you start to see the problem and how did you know you wanted to be the one to help fix it?
Yeah. So, I mean, nobody likes writing their notes. I am included in that group. That was like no fun at all. And I think part of the reason it drives the burnout is it feels like you're doing a kind of pointless task, right? At the point that I was writing a lot of my notes, because I spent a lot of time in the emergency department. That's where I would have ended up if I had done my residency.
Okay.
It's 1 or 2 a.m. You finished your shift, and I'm writing up stuff that's already been done, like
Right.
hours ago in the patient's discharge. And that was like that frustration was also sort of part of the reason for us to go and try to use AI to pull things out of that. Because like I write the note and then like no one else really looks at it unless they're maybe doing billing or some sort of like thing. And then
Sure.
hopefully maybe the next provider maybe looks at it, but they don't have a lot of time, right? Everybody's super busy. So the hope was, well, what if we could get the machines to read through the notes and pull out useful things from those, right? Then at least like I'm putting the information in and it's getting used, right? And it's hopefully used to make things better because I think the description of the patient, like if you can't be in the room actually seeing the patient with your own like 2 eyes and like laying hands on them, I think the narrative is the next like really valuable place, and not like the ICD-10 code that was selected, but like the
Exactly.
description of a good clinician saying like what they saw, what they were worried about, what they were thinking. But no one can read every single note that's in there for a patient.
Right.
And so that's what we're really excited about, because the machines can go and process millions and millions of notes, in a couple minutes and extract out hopefully that useful stuff. And we're applying it to a lot of physical therapy patients right now because they have a kind of especially onerous compliance problem where they have to write their note in very particular ways and they get in big trouble, if they
Yeah.
don't do it right. And yeah, like that was just like really exciting for us because I love technology. I loved AI ML, and seeing it just kind of churn through millions and millions of notes is like, wow, this is like a superpower. And I want to try to apply that to do good, useful things for patients.
That's amazing. And I think even like downstream, like I see patients in the home health setting. So I actually do read the note before I go meet the patient because I want to know what's going on. So I find it very valuable when I read a beautiful note from like the emergency medicine doctor or ortho, whatever physician or other provider wrote that. Because then I go in, the patient has more confidence that I already know their story. Like I have already heard them, and that helps so much with me getting to know them and streamlining my time, which is limited with a patient. And it's very valuable for the patient because they already trust you. So that's super cool because I think that you're helping everybody on the team, including the patients, with what you guys are doing. So that's awesome. What made you want to leave clinical care? Did you always know like you didn't want to do clinical care full time?
still actually really miss it. It's just like, it's such a fulfilling thing to like take care of patients, and even, all the crazy things and having to argue with other people or other departments, and
Right.
the
It's a
stuff
new
that
thing every
happens,
day.
right? Yeah, right. Something always breaks or causes trouble. But like it feels good. Like you go home at the end of the day and like, like at least I tried, really hard for my patients, and
Yeah.
sometimes you win, sometimes you don't. Um, but I just like am very picky. Like I'm a picky person. So going in and fighting that battle and not even having like the tools that I really wish that I had, that I felt like we could build, that was really the deciding factor. Is like, I think we can build it. I rather try and fail than not try. So, myself and Ravi Atreya, who was in the same program, we're just like, what, let's go try to do it. And here we are, like
Yeah.
7 years later.
Why not? Like you can always go back to full-time patient care if you super miss it, or, want to start another chapter in your life. So I am huge into nutrition in its role in health, longevity, the way we look, the way we feel. And for me in my, day-to-day life as a clinician, I think it plays such a huge role. And it's not often talked about between healthcare provider and patient. And there's a lot of misunderstanding, from either what a physician knows or a nurse knows or even a dietitian. And there's a lot of conflict from what we're seeing maybe on a television commercial about what's good for us. So talk to me a little bit about your experience in medical school. Let's start way back when. How was nutrition talked about? And do you think it was enough?
Yeah. So I feel like I've gone on a really big like nutrition arc over the course of my training, because in the beginning,
Sure. Same.
it lands in, yeah, right. It's kind of funny to think back, because at the time I just wasn't interested in anything like lifestyle, because it felt like there weren't clear effective things that people were doing, right? It was like eat less, move more. And then you tell people that and they don't do it, and then you feel like they're not trying. But then
Right.
I remember kind of going through my 20s, like med school is kind of stressful. So like I even kind of like started having some stuff like, oh, this is kind of weird. Like maybe I should try to, eat a little bit less, have some more salads, like do this, that, the other
Mhm.
thing. And then like it didn't go well, like this is the advice I'm giving other people. And I think we had like 5 lectures in nutrition, if that,
Wow.
for
And
like
that's like on the
2 days.
higher side from like what I hear. I mean, I had a half day. I went to Northwestern Feinberg School of Medicine and like great school and nothing against them. I think this is across the board. There's not enough talk about it. And as a physical therapist, like this is a lifestyle profession. Like we talk about lifestyle. So anyway, carry on, please.
So it was just, it like, it's hard for me to get excited about something if I don't feel like I understand it. And I like to try to understand from, here's the outcome we're seeing all the way down to like the molecule. I basically always tell people, if you can't draw the path from like the molecules that are bumping up against each other all the way to the outcome, like you don't really know what's going on yet. And the outcome better be like, you're getting like 80, 90% like effectiveness, because otherwise there's something missing in that path from molecules to outcome. And so nutrition and lifestyle stuff landed in this bucket of like, we don't understand it yet, and like I'm not seeing results, so I'm just going to kind of like ignore this because this isn't interesting.
Sure.
And I got my 5 lectures in nutrition, and we went over our nutrient deficiencies, and like I took the steps, and I'm done. I'm not going to worry about it anymore, until sort of after, and I started doing the startup thing and getting a little bit older and started trying this stuff myself, and started like seeing some stuff that did work, right? The intermittent fasting, some other like, pretty interesting things, and things where I could draw a path from like, oh, the insulin goes down, like that's the molecule would do this, like I'm seeing
Right.
actual results, and I had some family members with some pretty amazing results too. And like now it was cool, right? Because I could draw a path from molecules all the
Mhm.
way through to outcome. The outcome was obvious. You did get an outcome, and now it was motivating and interesting. And now it was kind of actually shocking, because this is not what they taught us. This is the opposite of some of the things that we
Exactly.
were told. And
And I
so,
think I don't know about you, but I think it's like so siloed, right? Like you were just saying you remember 5 like lectures or whatever, maybe 5 days, whatever it was for nutrition. Whereas like, shouldn't it be like when we're in our pharmacology courses, year 1, like talking about how lifestyle and nutrition play a role so we don't have to take these pharmaceuticals? Or when you're talking about your whatever unit, like or body part you're learning about, it just should be integrated, and it's not. It's just so separate. So I think that we get out into the world, we treat patients and we think about it as separate. We think about it as like, okay, well, if I have time, maybe we'll go over this, and we don't have time, right, with our patients. So It sounds like you're saying what a lot of other people say, because they don't get a lot of the knowledge and skills in school. It's like until they had some reason in their own personal life to start thinking about it, and they're like, whoa, like the light goes off, like I need to think about this differently with my patients too.
Yeah, that was very mind-blowing for me. It was just because I actually would have like a little bit of knee pain. I remember, I think I was like 24 years old, and I was like, this is weird. Like I should be able to go for a run and not like have kind of like knee pain. Or I remember being really worried about my dad, because he had obesity. He was definitely pre-diabetic,
Right.
and being worried about him and giving him the advice that like I was sort of learning. And it wasn't until we tried basically some different things and started seeing actual results that it was like, oh wow, like this is huge. This is really important. Um, and you can't obviously make as much direct influence when you're not seeing patients directly day to day, but I'm thinking about ways that we could try to pull data out and show people like, look, like, because we've done things where we'll process and look for things like, do they mention keto, do they mention different types of diet like Mediterranean, what is the outcome, what does that look like, and trying to get to the point where we could like give the data, because I think everybody has an experiment they're basically running in their own lives, because I don't
Right.
think there's one right answer for everybody. But I do think that if you follow the data and look at the metrics, and if you're moving in the right direction and you're improving, you feel great, and that's wonderful. But if
Mhm.
you're not, I think we need to highlight those opportunities with metrics and then track as you try different things what actually then yields an outcome that you really, really want.
Yeah.
So I think it'll hopefully tie back in eventually, but we're having to expand, slowly, because
Sure.
there's
Like
can
an
only be
idea
so
for the
much.
future. I think like, yeah, like you have that clinical experience, that background, and now you can use AI to really start to help providers and patients. So very cool. We need people like you in this very complex problem. So switching gears, when you were practicing medicine, whether it was your clinical rotations or I'm not sure how many years you spent in patient care, what frustrated you? Like, let's say you didn't have the opportunity to switch into using AI. What are some of the big problems that you could see would lead to burnout in you or other team members? And yeah, let's start there.
Yeah, I think that folks can work a lot of very long time and very hard if they feel like they're getting results.
Mhm.
And I saw sort of like two very related but like big problems. And one was that it felt like a lot of times you weren't maybe necessarily getting results, right? Like people, you're telling them to do certain things, you're trying to get them on medications, and they're just kind of deteriorating, and their diabetes is, getting worse, and that gets to be very frustrating because you don't feel like you're making impact. Um, and then related to that is that, what is a result, right? Because we've got certain process metrics that they'll follow, like what percent of people get their colonoscopy, what percent of people got this, that, or the other thing. But I never really felt like there was a clear number that like represented like healthy, that like you could see that go up. There's like per disease, maybe there's a metric that you can kind of follow, right? But sometimes, you're optimizing for, the efficiency, the billing efficiency, the units you saw, RVUs, all these other things. And like I understand why you're optimizing for those things, but like I think every doctor, if you could do it and provide a nice accurate number that we all agreed on, oh yeah, this number is healthy, and this week it's an 87, and before it was a 72. That's a great improvement, we can
Right,
get excited about that.
right.
I don't feel like it's actually very clear in medicine because of how complicated the human body is and how complicated healthcare is. I don't think it's easy to sort of see progress. And I think that's why a lot of people get frustrated and get upset or burnt out, is because it doesn't feel like you're making progress. But if you were making progress, even if it was just as hard, I think that it would be very different.
Yeah. Yeah, I can, that definitely resonates with me and some other people who are in this space. It's frustrating when you aren't seeing those results, because then you feel like, well, why am I doing all this work? If I'm actually not helping people, or even like helping people see that they are being helped, but um, if you were still practicing today, um, how would you speak to patients about nutrition? Let's say average American who's eating, what they think is a healthy diet, but there are definitely some big changes. Like, how would you approach that conversation? And what are some like low-hanging fruits, like 3 things that you would talk about with that patient in front of you?
So um, the number one thing I think is that we have to have some sort of like thing that we can track that's going to be progress. And I think, the scale isn't always really the best thing, because you can have your weight go up, but you actually be getting healthier. So that's a little bit tricky. So, I think you basically want to track like body comp, but people have different goals too. So, but like we have to pick a number and have some sort of data that we're going to, look at together. And somebody that's like really, really diabetic, A1C could be a metric to track, right? But anyway, pick a number is the most important thing. And then after that, I think things really flow from protein consumption, because you want to advocate something that's going to be long-term sustainable. So you can't advocate something that they're always going to be hungry, and protein is very high satiety, one thing. And to heal, to build muscle, to be healthy, to maintain health, your body has to be able to build and heal. And so you need the building blocks. And I tell people sometimes it's like Legos. If you're missing that piece for the Legos, you can't go and finish them. And I have a little one, and he loves to play all the time. And I've seen him hunt around, and he'll ask me, Dad, can you help me find the piece, right? And it just every single time I'm thinking amino acids and protein, and like, oh man, like if you don't have the piece and you can't build the muscle, but you can always break it down, right? You don't have to go find the piece to break down the muscle, or break down the Lego kit for the sake of the metaphor. So after having a metric, I think you really have to get the protein in that. 1 pound, or rather 1 gram per pound, of ideal body weight, I think is a really good rough, metric to try to aim for. But then you always have to also look at the bioavailability of that, because if you look at something like PDCAS or DIAS as a bioavailability estimate, there's some things where it's like 40%. So it might say on the package, raw protein, is 5 grams, but like you're really actually only getting like 2. And I don't think people realize that either. So prioritize protein, make sure that it's bioavailable protein. If it's something that's not as bioavailable, you can just kind of roughly know, like at least multiply by half. And then
How
make
would
sure that you hit
somebody
that first.
know if it's bioavailable, like everyday person?
Yeah.
Can you break that
So
down into simpler terms for people?
I think the absolute simplest is that if it's any sort of animal thing, like cheese, meats, eggs, seafood, it's going to be basically like 100% bioavailable. Some things are over theoretically, right? Because they help you absorb other things. And if it's the like really optimal plant foods, like tofu gets you kind of close, I think it's like a 0.8, or depending on like what scale and exact study you're looking at, you can get most of the way there with a few plant foods, but a lot of plant foods are going to be like 60% or even lower. So like I would basically kind of like roughly multiply by half to keep it really easy. So then right? Like, okay, I'm either cutting it in half, or I can basically count it for all of the grams. And like, that's the simplest thing to do. You can look them up, but I think then you're kind of making things a little bit too complicated. And again, I think this is a rough target that you're aiming for. But so if 2 is like protein, you want to get enough protein in, it'll keep you fuller. If you prioritize good sources, right, you'll then also be able to build more lean mass. And if you can build lean mass, then your metabolism can go up, because how much you burn, which I don't love thinking too much about calories in or calories out. I don't think that's the optimal way to think about it. I think it's a little bit more nuanced. But if you have more lean mass, I think you're overall usually healthier, but it also allows you to have more of a buffer, both for like being able to maybe eat a little bit more, but not having then weight gain basically, but then also like strength and mobility, just feeling good. I think people usually feel a lot better if they have a little bit more lean mass than if they don't. So protein really feeds into both, and they kind of then feed forward into each other. And then, after that, I picked number 1 for the metrics piece, because I think it's really important for people to kind of look and decide then what like fits, for them.
Sure.
But if I'm going to be prescriptive for like item number 3, I think timing of your meals is important. And I think that you go back to the molecules. We've talked about proteins. The one other molecule, if I can only have one other to think about, is insulin, because it's like this light switch. And if you never turn the light switch off, if you never turn off of a saving of a storage mode, right, then you can't burn through the fat. And some people are very not used to being in a fat burning mode. And if you have very frequent meals, especially if they're high carbohydrate, high insulin signaling, then you're just gonna put yourself in a really tough spot, where you can't, burn through some of the fat if that's your goal, or have a good balance of energy, because you want to be able to shift between the different settings more easily. I find that usually folks feel a lot more even energy, feel better, don't have like swings or get hangry and things if they're able to switch easily between the 3. So those are like my 3 favorite. Like, have some metrics to track for yourself, make sure you're getting enough protein, and then think about insulin. If you're going to think about one other thing, which is a molecule, right, then you can follow it up, and then decide or interpret from that understanding like what to do. Because if you if I just tell you like some blind thing to follow, but you
Right.
can't actually then think about it and what you're trying to do and what the molecules are actually doing in your body, I think it makes it a lot harder to understand when it's a good decision and when it's a bad decision. Should I eat at 3 a.m.? Well, maybe I'll bump my insulin, and then maybe my insulin will tell my fat cells to kind of like shut down and not let anything out.
Right.
And that's probably not going to help, right? But then they can
Right.
reason it themselves, which I think is really helpful.
Yeah, so a little bit back to 2 and 3. Let's stay on the topic of the timing, because I think in the really like patient-friendly language, I think what you're saying is like either the timing window, like, okay, you're only eating in an 8-hour window, or there's different ways to look at it. We're not snacking all day long and keeping our insulin levels like high, because then our body is not going to have a chance to break down fat, or it's going to store that energy, because that's what insulin tells our body. So like, if you have somebody that comes into your clinic, let's say, and their dietitian or their neighbor or whoever, a cat sitter, it was like, oh, you should eat 6 meals a day. Like, how would you say eat 3? Is there a certain way, or is it just like based on the individual?
Yeah, I think that the 2 meal a day, because again, you have to think about what's like easy to do. If it's like
Mhm.
really hard, people are less likely to do it. And for me and for many people, I think skipping like breakfast is like a really easy thing to do because maybe they're not even really hungry.
Right. So
And if
many
you're already
people think
prioritizing
that.
protein,
Yeah.
yeah, right. I remember as a kid, I wouldn't want to eat breakfast at all, but I was told like that's the healthy meal, and so
Right.
I was
Gotta
just
eat
like,
it.
I'll do something, right? And then I'd feel terrible. So it was really great finally learning that. It took a couple decades, but oh well. But if you do number two, right, and you're eating enough protein, then you probably actually get to the point where you're not that hungry for breakfast anyway.
Right.
And
Right.
that's a really easy one to skip. And then you're pretty quickly at the point where it's like an 8 hour window. And then you can basically tweak it. And if you're looking at your whatever your metric is for I'm getting better or not, if you're doing really, really well, you could imagine expanding a little bit. If you're not having not having progress, right, then maybe you need to tighten it down to like a 6 hour window. And that metric helps you sort of then guide what decisions you make next, right? Um, I do have, this is my only slight like tweak on this. It's maybe a little bit more nuanced. Is that the insulin piece? If you're thinking about that, well, then maybe one of those meals you just do extra low carb, even because then you're kind of consolidating what would trigger potentially an insulin spike. So
Right.
that's like kind of a little more of an advanced, maneuver to try out. But again, monitor that metric that you're picking to figure out if you're going in the right direction or not, and experiment with things like that to see what works.
Okay. So there's not one right way, but starting, oh my gosh, there's like construction. That's great.
It's halfway through. So
Oh, it's not? Okay, good. They're like,
yeah.
I've never heard construction in my house, but there is some. Um, so going back to bioavailable protein, I think there's a lot of confusion, like with people thinking that plant protein versus animal protein. So you're saying more bioavailable in the animal protein, which I totally agree with. But I think that there is this misconception that it's the same. The protein in your tablespoon of peanut butter is the same as protein in an egg. And it's objectively just, it's not true, correct?
Yeah, no, it's not. I mean, you can look at it a lot of different ways. I think the simplest way is if you pick something like, PDCAS has its issues there. It's PDCAAS and then DIAS, DIAAS,
Okay.
are these two different scoring systems. You can go to a number, and that number then basically tells you like how much of the number on the package am I actually going to absorb? Because it doesn't help you if you don't absorb it, so you can turn it into muscle and bone and skin, right? Um, and my rule of thumb is kind of like multiply by half basically for plant stuff, right? And that you can basically take the number as is for something like, again, eggs, meat, dairy, cheeses, and because they're not, because the amino acids are actually different. And um, if, again, going back to the Lego metaphor, if you're missing whatever the piece is, like you can't go to the next step. And every protein is a string, kind of like a pearl necklace, right? But the pieces, you have to do exactly the right kind of pearl at each stage. And if you don't have the next piece, you can't go on to continue. And so building whatever you're trying to build, muscle, perhaps in a case, you can't continue forward until you find that piece. So if whatever you're eating, a lot of plant foods won't maybe have as much like lysine,
Mhm.
then you're going to be missing that piece. And so every time your body goes to like attach that piece to the next little part of the string to build that protein, it's going to take longer to find it, which means that you're going to synthesize muscle more slowly. And so I'm not trying to like push people to any sort of like one thing, but like this is just it. You have to have molecules bounce against each other and accomplish stuff. And so you happen to need, certain amino acid molecules available to build protein. and I'm just giving people the information and I'm giving them a metric so they can figure out what works for themselves. I think that's the most empowering way. And I think when you empower people to kind of experiment and figure out what works for them, that's the best way to doing it versus trying to be too prescriptive about exactly what to do.
Yeah, I think that's good advice. Like the bio-individuality of us all, like not everything is going to work for every person. Last question, kind of fun. What is your diet like? You know, what's a typical day of eating for you? Like timing, what kind of foods you like, and when did you start eating like this?
Yeah, so I've been doing this now for at least like I'd say basically 3 years. It might be like a little bit more, but I went through this phase where I sort of like just changed. Like initially, I just tried to do time restricted eating, and then I kind of failed at that, which I think it's good to share, right? Like I tried, and like, oh man,
Yeah,
this is really hard.
right.
And the reason I got back on was actually I was being lazy. It was just like, it was really nice not having to bring in a breakfast or a snack or whatever for work.
It's easier. You have a
Yeah,
little
so then I
kid,
was like, oh,
right? Like less time.
yeah, exactly. So I was like, okay, I'll try again, right? And then that time it kind of stuck, and I got kind of used to it. And then I just kind of like went through keto, and then like I'm, largely sort of like I guess you'd call it like carnivore. So easily 90% of my diet will be meat, eggs, dairy, seafood. And then, but I'll sometimes do a little bit different. Maybe I'll have like a little bit of like potato or something.
Sure.
And I'm not incredibly strict with it because I feel like I found a couple things where I can have them, but I know like things, especially with like high volumes of sugar, I'll kind of feel like stiff and not quite as good the next couple days. Sometimes I'll like totally pass out on the couch when I have a day where I kind of experiment too much with things.
So it
The
sounds like
normal
you're more
day
of
is
an
basically,
animal-based diet.
yeah, exactly. Right. And it's just, that's, I've basically just tried things out, tried incorporating them or not, and just kind of got to the point where I know sort of like what works for me and what doesn't. Basically, the animal-based things will work really, really well. I will do coffee in the morning, so I'll just do some black coffee most days, like a cup, maybe a cup and a half, and then a lot of salt because I did have some challenges with electrolytes and kind of headaches or feeling kind of fatigued. And bringing my salt content up, having some electrolyte beverages every now and then, really helped. Like just kind of took that completely away, like no cramps, no fatigue or anything, and feel sort of like my best on that. Yeah.
Yeah, same experience for me with like the salt and electrolytes. Huge game changer, especially with like people with a history of headaches. I was one of those migraines, and it's really changed since I started adding like electrolytes and adding more salt, because that's huge for hydration. Anything else you'd like to add? Like where can people find more about your work, especially providers who are interested in what you're doing?
Yeah. So our startup is Prediction Health. So you can just go predictionhealth.com.
Great
Um,
website, by the way.
thank you. Thank you. Appreciate it. And that's like the main spot. I am on Twitter as vote underscore for Pedro if folks want to contact me. Yeah, I mostly post about sort of diet and fun little food things. Every now and then I'll post a good meal if I have it and
Nice.
make some kind of like wacky, probably nerdy comments for the most part.
It's a safe space for that on Twitter. We can say what we want. It's unfiltered. And that's how you and I met. I was attracted to your tweets and I was like, this guy has something interesting to share with my patients and other healthcare providers. So I really appreciate you taking the time out of your very busy day to help me and others like myself in this mission.
Wonderful. I'm really, really happy to help. And um, if this serves as sort of some help for some people, to improve their health, that's so important to me. Health is, I think, by far the most important thing. And if you don't have it, you don't really care about much else. So
Exactly.
I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to hopefully help some other folks figure out what's right for them so they can feel their best.
All right. Thank you so much. And you have a great rest of your day.